Hi, I'm Matt Roberts, health and OCR coach. Welcome to the Obstacle Dominator podcast. We specialize in training new and upcoming OCR athletes to excel in both life and competition. If you're a racer looking to improve your running, enhance your obstacle efficiency, and learn how to fuel your body for peak performance, you've come to the right place. We'll cover everything from building confidence, physical ability, your physique, and owning nutrition and recovery techniques. Join us for our weekly podcast episodes where you'll discover the race strategies and tactics that we teach our successful team members that will also allow you to dominate the obstacles in your path. Erin, how are you?
Hi Matt, how you doing? Oh, oh, I can't hear anything you're saying. I could hear you initially, but you've gone. Sorry.
Just give me 2 secs. Yeah, I think we're working
Oh,
now.
there you go. You're back. You're back. Can you hear me all right? It told me my microphone wasn't working a second ago.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, it's just a little bit intermittent my end, a little bit glitchy.
Okay.
Let me see
Okay.
why. Yeah, it's just a little bit glitchy at the moment. Let me just close some apps and things like that and see if that
Can
improves
always
the
try it with my video off as well, see if that makes any difference.
Yeah, it seems to be a bit clearer now, actually. I think it was just the
Yeah.
connection stuff. It was a little bit, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine now.
Oh,
All right, well,
fine.
let's dive in. No doubt there'll be
All right.
tech complications like there normally is.
I hate it. Yeah, I hate it. It's the worst
But
part.
yeah, it's all good in theory working in like the virtual setting, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
does
And
cause
then
problems.
yeah, and then it doesn't work, and it's just the most stressful thing in the world.
Yeah, yeah. I'd normally end up like waiting for Zoom or something like buffering endlessly for,
Yeah.
yeah. Great. Let's dive in. So,
All right.
yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to share like the work that you do. Um, yeah, obviously gained a lot of value in the work that we've done over this year. So yeah,
Brill.
it's
Yeah.
great for you to share this. I think a good place to start is like talk about like what got you into like your fitness journey,
Yeah.
what drew you into doing like biomechanics and also your Pilates as well, and yeah,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
benefits of what that contained.
Sure. So, what got me into fitness, I suppose, really, it was a dancing background for me more than anything. So childhood, um, spent in a dance studio for the most part, and I loved it. I was interested. I was thinking this through the other day. Actually, the one of the things that I've been most passionate about is just training. I love training. It's not even necessarily training for anything in particular. I've had loads of different interests and hobbies and different sports that I wanted to try, and some to a higher level, some not to a high level at all. But it is the background hours that I love more than anything else. I don't get a massive kick out competing or doing shows or competitions or anything like that. It's for me, it is much more just about the training. I would want to be first into a studio and first out and last out of it. That was the joy of for me. It is the training side of it is what I really like. Um, Dancing is what got me into it. So I started when I was like 2. It was I was not supposed to. You weren't supposed to start until you were 3, but I wasn't taking no for an answer. So I was straight in there. And I did that up until I was about 18. Um, and I was kind of borderline. I was toying with the idea of going off and doing either a degree at conservatoire or something like that, or trying to join a company. But for lots of different reasons, my knees were a bit knackered at that point, and my back was definitely quite knackered. So I was doing kind of auditions and mock auditions to get into those kind of institutions, and I was just in quite a lot of pain. So I thought this isn't a great start to a what's probably going to be a really hard career. So I kind of flipped it around at that point, and tried to think what else I would want to do that wouldn't be quite as damaging. And I'd been teaching Pilates by then for about 2 years. I did my training when I was 16. Um, I got into Pilates, which is more, how I've got into the work that I do now. I got into Pilates when I was 14. That's when I injured my back. Um, and I use that as a bit of a rehab method, really, of trying to. I never got anything diagnosed. I just decided the best thing to do was to take some painkillers and keep dancing, which was I wouldn't recommend. So though I think I caused more issues than was strictly speaking necessary, unfortunately. But so anyway, I started doing Pilates to try and with the sole intention of not having to stop dancing. And it did. I found it really, really helped. Actually, it helped manage the pain level, the discomfort level. But then I also started realizing that actually other things were getting better as well that were not related to my back. So I was able to do turns better, spins better, like everything felt stronger, back felt better. I was getting more flexible and all that sort of stuff, which I was quite surprised at because I'd done so much of the dance training that was really geared towards that. And I was surprised that there was something else that I was like, oh, this is actually making more of a difference than I thought it would. Um, so that's how I got into it. I did it for a couple of years, attending classes, and then I got really lucky actually, as is I think we all need a little bit of luck every now and again, but I got really lucky. The woman that I was working with, who was teaching me, she sort of took me under her wing a little bit and helped me with clients and all that sort of stuff after I got my qualification. So I was really lucky that by sort of 16 I was student teaching, and then 17 I had my own clients and classes and stuff like that, which was absolutely terrifying. But but it was a good start. So that's what got me into it. Yeah, a very long-winded answer of what got me into the Pilates stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting because well, a number of things come up there. It was really cool what you were saying about like just like movement. You done it for like the enjoyment of it, and I feel like that can be lost for the most part with anything. And if you think back to like childhood, just being like quite free and out in nature, yeah, just moving, climbing things, like crawling, just being very sort of playful.
Yeah,
Certainly seen for myself, like getting wrapped up in the competitiveness of everything can take away from that enjoyment and ultimately why you do it. And it sounds
yeah,
like you were training and training hard for like your personal development to be the best that you can.
yeah,
But then also like the thing that come out of that seemed like being in pain because we focus on doing like the big work and the stuff that's really going to move the needle, but then actually we
yeah,
neglect the smaller stuff that feeds into that. And I think that kind of feeds
yeah,
into like work that we've done together this year. Um, and it's obviously important to do the stuff that makes a big impact, but it's
of
almost like
course. Yeah,
you're building that out and you've got these big pillars, but then like the foundational structure is a little bit flimsy. And it sounds like
yeah, that's it.
Pilates was something to like stabilize you and make you stronger, um, which
Yeah,
sounds like it fed nicely into your dancing as well.
yeah. No, it is. It's a really interesting one, and you'll see one of the one of the things that going into the biomechanics training and stuff like that was that I found really fascinating. One of the guys that was on my training course was he did a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu and had done it for years. He was probably in his 40s, I think. Really, really nice guy, and he's been a PT. He was kettlebell specialist kind of stuff, and he'd competed with jiu-jitsu for quite a few years and trained it. And I think around that time he'd just got his brown belt or something like that. So he'd done it to a really high standard and done it for years. And I always find this fascinating whenever you work with particularly athletes, but generally the athletes that are performing really well. You look into you kind of ask them how they're feeling, and you expect them to be like, yeah, pretty good, pretty loose, and they're like, oh, this hurts and this hurts, and oh no, I can't do that, and all this. I was like, how are you moving? Like, it's really impressive, and it was the same with him. He had a real tightness in his back and quite a lot of discomfort in his back, and you wouldn't know it seeing him walking around. He's a really tall guy, but um jacked, really well built, doing all of these competitions, doing really well with his training and all this kind of stuff. But you got him to do the most simple movements, and there's just different parts of his body that are just rigid, just no movement in it at all. So that's what I then started to find really exciting. And at that point, but then also when I first started training, was like, well, if people can be achieving what they're achieving with all of this dysfunction and pain potentially, but dysfunction, imbalance, asymmetry, um, if they can still be achieving what they're achieving with all of that going on, I imagine what we could achieve if you can even all of that out, and if you can have everything balanced and as symmetrical as it can be for you, and you can have, your muscles can be as strong as they can be, and your joints can have as much movement as they can.
Mm.
So that started really sparking my interest, and you see it over and over again, and that's the one thing that catches people normally when because it's kind of, a lot of people won't really, they have an idea about what Pilates is or yoga is, or any of that kind of stuff. And the biomechanics stuff is a little bit less known, but that as well to a certain extent. But as soon as you explain it to people that way, and then they start to get a little bit of a feel for it, it's like, that's the light bulb moment that most of us, when we're training, we're building up all of these little habits and little compensations that actually over time form this kind of really solid protective mechanism. And actually, we can just release that, we've got so much more potential, which is really, really exciting for me. So yeah.
Yeah, it's all really, really fascinating. And the thing that come up for me there, like within or any form of movement or any sport, they can all become quite like repetitive. So although they can be
Mm.
quite like dynamic by nature, like dance or even like jujitsu, I mean, the amount of like ways you can move your body through the different planes of movement, but
Yeah,
then still find yourself in a position of pain because something has been neglected within that pattern of movement is really, really interesting. And I've done jujitsu for some time, and actually like looking at the guys that have been doing it for years, often they would boil it down to only having maybe 2 to 4 moves that they repeat in terms of like their takedown. So it's like,
yeah,
wow, you've got
yeah,
this ability and this whole skill set, and you can move your body in this particular way, but you
yeah,
don't just locked in, which is very good for that particular like art, but
yeah.
it's limiting in numerous different aspects. And then
That's
yeah,
it. Yeah,
it's fascinating. And then I
it's
think
interesting.
with your story and also with this guy in particular story, and I can think of a number of other people, it's like pain is often like the catalyst for change, but pain is often a sign that something has been going wrong for some time before it even
Yeah,
starts to happen. But then we start listening to it
absolutely.
when the pain is present.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think we're all guilty of it to a certain extent. And I think it's an inbuilt sort of human nature to just keep going until you can't really. And I think people that are really into their sport, whether it's competitive or professional or not, you've got that extra pressure that you put on yourself to be kind of like, no, 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 I'm not. I can. Obviously, when you train, it doesn't feel pleasant all the time. If you're running really hard, that can be, you enter the pain cave for various different reasons, and it's like we're quite used to getting into that mindset of just being like, no, just push through. And although that's really valuable, and we wouldn't have the PBs and the world records that we have now if it wasn't for that. It's at the same time, we've got to be quite mindful from a training point of view of actually like, okay, no, I need to just have that starting block. And like you say, if I've got to the point where things are feeling, where I can actually feel things being painful or uncomfortable, that's exactly it. It's your body's way of going like, you keep doing this, I'm going to get to a point where I'm not going to let you do it anymore. And it's we
Mhm.
yeah, surprisingly often push ourselves to that point, which is then when we've got the rehab side of stuff. And what it's really cheesy, but to try and think of it as get your prehab instead of
Mm,
rehab, try and do the prehab work so that you don't have to do rehab. And certainly
yeah,
not as a kind of regular thing, because you just neglected your training a little bit. But it's, yeah, what you're saying with the guys kind of rolling in jiu-jitsu and all that kind of stuff and going to their sort of favored moves again. That's, that's what we all do, but it comes to the efficiency side of stuff. And the same with running, any kind of training, lifting weights. When we first start, we're really inefficient with it. So we burn more calories, we use more energy, it feels worse. Your rate of perceived exertion will be higher. Um, and we kind of see that as a bad thing, and we're like, oh, just want to get better at it, want to be able to run at this pace and it to feel better, and that's great. It's a really good goal to have. But actually, in terms of challenging the body, when we become efficient, we're efficient. So we're not challenging as much as we were when we weren't very efficient at it. So it's just worth remembering in your kind of training layout, if you like, in your planning, put a random session in every now and again where where you do something that you're not very good at, where you do something that feels really weird, um, because your body will learn so much from it. And actually, if you can get good at being uncomfortable, and if you can get good at doing things that you're not very good at overall, that's really, really helpful for your body to become more resilient and less prone to injury, because it becomes more adaptable. So if we're seeking that efficiency and purely chasing that, it's not necessarily the best solution or the best idea for our body's resilience longer term.
yeah, definitely. I think well, humans are always looking for the faster, the simpler route. Yeah, I think it's wired into us, like genetically, like we want the path of least resistance. We want the highest yield for the least amount of effort. Yeah, we
Yeah,
want to consume as many calories and burn as little as possible. Like evolutionary, it makes sense to survive. And I feel like we can
yeah,
get stuck in these patterns. Um, and although it can help in the short term and can elevate us to success, and we can really like prioritize that and dial that in. But then, like you were saying with your example and this guy's example, it's like eventually the cracks will start to form. And one of the like most challenging things I've encountered, like coaching, is coaching younger people, because they don't want to listen to this sort of stuff. Like they don't. It's often the people that are a little bit older, the cracks are starting to form, or they're in pain and they're trying to move away from the pain. But a lot of younger guys, I've not really coached too many younger females, but like the guys who just want to pack on muscle, they want to get there as quick as possible. They don't really care about like the detrimental effects that may be having at that precise time, because that's way off in the future. Whereas actually, if they could like listen and like do some of this like foundational work, and I'm guessing that you probably change your approach in some ways, because I'm sure like that sort of experience has led to all the wealth of knowledge you've had now. So I'm not sure how much of that you change, but yeah, it's yeah, having
yeah,
that knowledge and implementing these things into our routine would actually be so much more beneficial for the performance at that like front end, but then also it would give us
yeah,
longevity, and we'll be doing this for longer and performing better for longer.
yeah. That's it. There's 2 points that I want to cover with that, because the briefly the our what we what we think of as the most important thing, what our priorities change. They definitely change. And when I can't remember who said it, terrible with remembering detail, but someone said you can have 100 problems until you have a health problem, and then you've just got the one problem. And it's kind of the same with with physical pain and with movement. You're as soon as you If you're someone who's used to moving, if you're used to training, and for whatever reason that's you've motivated yourself to do that, as soon as a little bit of that gets taken away from you, it's devastating. And if you've had an injury or you've had a condition come up that you're working with, it's a really awful feeling. It's a really like panicky feeling. Oh my god, I can't train anymore. I can't move anymore. And even even to the extreme of it not being training, just I can't stand comfortably, or I've got a pain that's there consistently or something like that, that all of a sudden becomes a real like um it yeah, life changing awareness, I suppose. And whether we, whatever stage of life we're in, we will hopefully we'll get to move past it and our priorities will change. And so looking at the point of view of longevity is a really important one, even if at the stage you're at the moment in life is saying, I just want to go and achieve, I want to be the best at whatever it is that I'm doing. That's fantastic, and we can try and help you do that. But also, let's just be aware, let's not screw everything over, so that when inevitably you don't really want that in the same way, you can still go and have a life and walk around and be hopefully pain free. And then the second thing with that was I've worked with a couple of younger individuals, and the one lad that comes to mind was um he's been one of my favorite clients actually, and partly because he was really unusual for working with somebody that was that age. I think he was 18 or something like that, and got all of these goals in terms of what he wanted to do career wise and all this kind of stuff. Wanted to join the military, and he was such a joy to work with, because he's one of the only people that I've come across that, bar a few, that have been really, really willing to take things slower. And it was really interesting because I didn't expect it at all when we first had our first um, introductory session and kind of meet and greet sort of thing, and just finding out what he wanted to achieve. I was thinking, oh, okay, I'm gonna spend the whole time that I have with this person being like, slow the fuck down, like just stop training, stop doing all of this kind of stuff that isn't helping you. But he was so good at listening, to being like, okay, I don't want you to do that for now. Like, let's leave that. This obviously isn't helping. Do this. I know it's really boring. I know it's tedious. Blah blah blah. But when you do get a client like that that listens, and I'm sure you found this as well with your stuff, when people are actually willing to not only take your advice, but there's like, for whatever reason, they've got to a point where they're willing to do things that they don't necessarily understand or doesn't necessarily make the most sense to them, and maybe goes against the grain a little bit. And it's just such a joy to work with people like that. I'm sure you found that with your training and your clients as well, especially in that kind of sport.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think in the place that we operate, like I hadn't really heard too much of the work that you'd done until just prior before working with you, and I was very like intrigued. Um, and it does take trust, because it's like a new process. It's unconventional. We may not have necessarily heard much about it, and to really like let that sort of in and like embody it and trust the process is big. But I've
Mm.
found like as soon as people like have the willingness to do that and to learn, then they start to see the changes, they make progress, then they build trust in the process, and then they want more, and then they see more progress, and it's like
Yeah,
this real contagious thing.
yeah, it's a snowball
Build,
effect for sure. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And I think deep down we're all like, we all want that, we all want to make the progress, but it's can be quite challenging to do that. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I and my team speak about that's very like different, very unconventional.
mm.
People are like, well, how can that work? Well, it's like, well, what you're currently doing isn't working, and all you need to
Yeah,
do is look at the results that we've got, we continue to get, and it kind of adds up and makes sense. But I think
yeah,
creatures, like humans, are quite skeptical creatures. Yeah, and seeing and experiencing is them believing. But if they've not had
that's it.
positive experiences, although they're not experiencing the progress and the results that they want, they still
Yeah.
continue to reinforce that failure. And it's quite funny. There's a type of person called an askhole who asks for all the advice and
Oh,
goes, "Hey,
I love
yeah,
it.
do
That's brilliant.
that." But then they don't actually apply it. They're like, yeah, 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 okay, I'll give it a
Oh,
shot.
that's
They don't
worse.
believe.
That's brilliant. No, that's so funny. That's so true. And it's so frustrating to see it because it's kind of and you can normally tell as well, and people will ask you stuff and you're like, you're not there's no point. There's no point in me telling you this, but I'll try and explain it. But that's brilliant. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a good term for it. But it's yeah, the biomechanics side of it's quite interesting because it's when you say people ask me what I do, what my job title is, intrinsic biomechanics coach is like, oh, what's that? Pilates is a little bit different, although even that actually, in some ways, I find it harder to convince people about Pilates because there's so much surrounding it. Like, it's a kind of middle class mum thing to do, or like women over 50, 60 that are going to do it, or people in London, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So there's already all of that preconceived notion with Pilates, which in a way is harder. You've got to undo all of that first. Um, with the intrinsic biomechanics stuff, it's like, oh, what's that then? So people generally have a little bit more curiosity with it, which is quite useful. But um, they're interesting to me, and I wanted to pair them, the Pilates and the biomechanics coaching. It was a sport specific qualification that I did, which was equi Pilates, which was for Pilates for horse riders, very specifically, all about that posture and the aids that you need to give to the horse and all that side of it. And that was the first course that I came across that had Pilates and intrinsic biomechanics sort of used both of them to try and get the best out for your clients. So I did that, and then a few years later, I wanted to do the sort of the full diploma in the biomechanics coaching, which I did, which was amazing. It was such a good course, and so kind of so much to take away from it. Um, but that pairing I really really like because it works at the if you think of it, if you've got your sort of training pyramid, and right at the top of the pyramid you've got your sport, whatever that is. You've got your kind of highest level of performance achievement, whether it's running or horse riding or dancing or climbing or like whatever it is. You've got your highest level of performance, your peak, and then below that you've got this is where the Pilates stuff fits in. You've got the sort of functional movement training that kind of preps your body for that higher stuff. You're still doing lots of movement, you're strengthening the core, you're lengthening the muscles, you're prepping your body on that sort of level. And for years that's what I worked off. It was just kind of those two. That's how I thought of it for myself as well. um and then the intrinsic biomechanics comes into it, and you think of that then as the third level of a triangle. It goes even deeper, and it's like you're prepping your body to be able to do really basic functional movements that you then do in Pilates, and then you do it in the higher up, harder stuff. So the biomechanics builds awareness of your body, but it highlights any kind of imbalances or dysfunction, kind of blockages that we might have in the joints or ligaments, tendons, muscles. So it kind of gives you this picture, if you like, of it's like, okay, so this is why my body might struggle to do this kind of movement, or this is why my body might struggle to hamstring stretch, and therefore, that affects me with my running or something like that. Because actually, the nerve in my hamstring or around my hamstring is pretty tight, and it's way worse on the left than it is on the right. So actually that all of a sudden makes sense. So you can kind of build down, if you like. You've got all of these different layers that you can add in, which is again what I started to find really exciting, going into it a little bit deeper, of just being like, so there's, you can sort of unpick stuff. And if for me with dancing, obviously it's very aesthetic. You spend a lot of time in front of a mirror, and you can see if your right leg is able to go higher than your left leg and all this kind of stuff, or if you can turn out better on one side than the other. And the Pilates sort of showed me it's like, oh yeah, that's the same with any movement I do. I'm more flexible on my right and my left, um and it feels easier, blah blah blah. But with the biomechanics side of stuff, it was like, oh, so that's actually where that comes from. That's why. And actually, there is stuff I can do to try and even that out. And if I can, my hip sockets are the same because I can test that and they're the same. but actually it's something in the nerve or it's something in the muscle on the left, or it might be somewhere in my back or something like that. And if I can release all of that, all of a sudden, all these tests that I can do for flexibility and range of movement, all of a sudden free up, because you can trace it right back to that sort of really fundamental level of movement that we affect daily just by how we sit and how we stand and how we walk, and then higher up how we train repetitively as well. So yeah, it's an interesting trail to follow back down all the layers.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because like, the way I like see, well, like movement in general, and then like the training on top of that, a lot of people will be like sedentary, or they'll sit or stand or do the repetitive movements that we've spoken about for like the majority of the day. And then what they'll do is
Yeah,
they'll isolate like the training or particular movements that they're training specific to their sport or whatever they do, like
yeah,
to a moment of the day. But then it's like, well, how can you fully expect that to compensate to the truest like potential and way if
yeah,
actually it's so far out of balance? Um,
yeah,
let's say if you're sitting at a computer desk all day, but then you're doing, I don't know, some like work to help with your posture 1 or 2 times a week, you're
mm,
then spending 8 to 10 hours in that position. It just far outweighs what work you're actually doing, and then you don't see the progress that you want because actually the balance isn't there correctly. And then like speaking about like the biomechanics and the METs, like something you said to me was like incorporate it into the day, like try and do it
yeah,
little and often sporadically. And that worked really well for me. And also it's like a method we apply with our guys, not the METs specifically,
mm,
but just like general movement across the day. I was actually speaking to one of my coaches yesterday. And it was like, how can we incorporate more movement into your day? And was talking about like he like chases and races his dog up the stairs by crawling and crawling around the garden,
yeah,
lifting stuff and moving in so many different ways. Because, like we said at this, like working in like an online setting, you can
yeah,
become quite sedentary and get caught up in these repetitive patterns of movement. So it's like, how can
yeah,
we become more like dynamic and focus on, yeah, just moving body in a multitude of different ways and blending that in as much as possible without it actually being overload to, well, be
yeah,
spread across the day. So actually we can gain the benefits. And some of
yeah.
it for what we do is quite unstructured and what you kind of feel called and pulled to do in that moment. But then other stuff can be more structured, and I think that's where like the METs come in as being like structured but very beneficial with like quite simple but effective movements.
That's it. Yeah, it's there's a author that I'd really recommend anyone to go and read, actually, whether you're, sport, fitness, athlete, whatever, or not. Doesn't matter at all. She's called Katie Bowman, and I think she's Canadian biomechanist. She used to be a runner, um, and she's put out some really, really fantastic books. They're amazing. But one of them is called, I think it's Move Your DNA.
Yeah.
I might be wrong on that. I think it's Move Your DNA. And it's really, really interesting. It's an amazing book. But basically what it's saying is that you can the movement that we do or don't do changes us on a cellular level, changes our DNA. So if we, and this kind of ties back into the efficiency thing actually, but if we sit, then, and you do more sitting than anything else, your body, your body's response to that on a cellular level will be, this seems to be happening quite a lot. How can I make this easier for myself? Which is great. It's an amazing system, and it's, on a scientific level, that's a fascinating process. Um,
Mm.
but actually, when you think of that, then from, all right, so what majority of my day do I spend sitting? And it was it was really interesting when the whole standing desk came out. It's like, it's no better if you're spending the same amount of time doing it. Your body needs the variety. It needs variety. Sitting in itself isn't bad for you. Sitting doesn't cause back pain. It's just, if you're doing more sitting than you are of anything else, day after day, week after week, year after year, your body will become so used to sitting and so good at sitting that actually doing other stuff becomes much harder. And so you're more likely to pull your back when
Mm.
you're, rotating or when you're doing something that isn't that seated position. It's exactly the same if it's standing or if it's, whatever position it is, it's the lack of movement, it's the lack of variety. And for the, stimulation point of view as well, we want to get that blood flow into those parts of the body, into the part of the body. And it's the lack of variety, the lack of movement and stimulation that's the real kicker. So it's not so much about changing your position and then just staying there instead. It's kind of, we want to think of movement as nutrition. We
Mm.
need variety, we need all sorts of different input, and it needs to be right for what we as individuals need at that moment in time. It's not a kind of one size fits all sort of solution. um, if you're lacking a particular nutrient, then you want to top up on that a little bit. But once you've topped up on it, you can probably just have the normal amount and then crack on.
Mm.
Um, and it's going to be different for everybody. So I think with fitness and we've and I suppose maybe with gyms to a certain extent, but kind of if you take the fitness industry as a whole, it has, obviously it's huge. It's a massive, massive industry, but I think the downfall of it a little bit is that it has become a bit too much one size fits all. And even in the advice that people are given, it's so much. We'll kind of ask people, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? When do you want to achieve it by? But we very often find that we don't look at where this person is actually starting from in terms of their physical readiness, if you like,
Mm.
to actually start. So we can often, be starting them at a place that they're maybe not quite ready for, or if it's someone that's already training, a higher level athlete, we can actually very often miss the fact that it's like, well, okay, your pelvis isn't particularly uh, functional at the moment. It's not very balanced, so we need to just work on that first, and then we can see what happens from there. So it's kind of, it's taking it the level deeper when people, like you said earlier, people do just want to shoot past that and just see what they can achieve.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great book. I followed Katie Bowman for a few years. I actually read Move Your DNA, I think in 2019.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, she's definitely someone to go and look at if people haven't like viewed her. I think even at the start of this year, I come across some of her stuff online, and she's showing us around her house and whatever else, and literally a whole house is just rigged for different types of movement, balance,
yeah,
like way everything's set up, and
yeah,
that's a really really cool thing. And I
yeah,
think back then, actually, it was yeah, we went into lockdown afterwards, and that's when I started incorporating more like dynamic movement into my routine, more sporadic movement, but then also was starting to like ground live. And that's actually something I do for the large part now anyway. Like I have like a
mm,
ground sofa, a ground bed. I know she
yeah,
sometimes sleeps on the floor and stuff like that as well, because she's not a
yeah,
fan of like, mattresses and stuff like that. It's like
yeah,
it's natural, it's making us soft.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, it's really, really fascinating. And it's like, well, if we look at like the blue zones and longevity, like
mm,
the Okinawa ones in specifically, they ground live. And one of the bout, and I think Katie Bowman speaks about this, is like they're squatting like 100 times a day because they sit on the ground, they don't have
yeah,
chairs, or if they do, they're very, very
yeah,
low or a cushion. So that load bearing
yeah,
activity actually helps with their bone density, their muscle mass, and therefore their resilience to like slips, falls,
yeah,
etc. But
yeah,
like you're saying, we're almost doing the complete opposite because we're training in a gym. Like I used to like refer to the gym as like the human zoo. It's like really strange how we all like congregate in one area to move our body. And then we do like, repetitive like Lego man movements. We're only like doing
yeah,
flexion and extension rather
yeah,
than lots of rotational movement. But then that
yeah,
goes back
that's
to
it.
what you're saying about the fitness industry and what we were saying about people that are younger. um, they often don't want to focus on that foundational work of like working on like the nervous system or like their
Mm.
actual like posture, because they want to look a particular way, they want to look aesthetically pleasing. But it's
Yeah.
really funny because I see a lot of lads that have like a decent amount of muscle on them, but they've got like
Mm.
really rounded shoulders or a hunchback. So it's like you're working so hard on this physique, but you actually look
Yeah.
crap because
That's
you
it.
kind of like, you Quasimodo's body double.
Yeah.
And that
That's
just goes
it. That's
the
it.
environment and the work that you do has an influence on it. And in fact, come to think of it, in Katie Bowman's book, I didn't understand it when I first started reading it. I was actually at the time, I remember
Mm.
posting on my social media, but it was an orca. If you remember, it's like a drawing of an orca, but the orca's fin is bent
Yes.
over. So it's almost like
Yeah.
Free Willy in captivity. He's
Yeah.
got the bent fin because of the
Yeah.
environment. And basically what she's like alluding to by posting that picture is like well, our environment determines like the outcomes that we get, like physically, like mentally, emotionally, like
Yeah.
whatever environment we're in, the body will mold
Yeah.
that. And that's seen
That's it.
in Walker. Like when they're free, they don't typically have
Yeah.
that issue,
Yeah.
unless it's
Exactly. That
stress.
condition doesn't exist in wild orca. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, and it just goes. So in a way, we're in captivity in our own homes and within the gym. So yeah, really just opening this up and yeah,
Yeah.
broadening.
No, it's a really interesting one. And the you can I always find it fascinating when you get somebody that walks in and you can tell that they've been training possibly for most of their life from kind of childhood. You can definitely tell a difference in people that have been training or working out or doing any kind of sport since they've been kids and people that have started as adults. So that's a really interesting one to look at and to notice. But it's you obviously we get kind of sport specific injuries or strains, and that's really common. But the people that you see that have more resilience in their body will have been doing training that is really varied. So climbers are quite a good one, and they obviously you get a lot of tendon injuries in the hands and elbows and shoulders and that sort of thing. But um, actually, generally, the people that are um, the most functional, if you like, on this kind of really basic level, not basic level, really deep level rather, um, are people that haven't trained to a really, really high standard and have trained consistently with loads of variety. So these are, people that they try lots of different things. They'll do things with hand-eye coordination. They'll play, like, they'll be up and down, they'll climb things, they'll jump off things, so anything that's got all of that variety where you're just putting all of these different forces through your body, that certainly seems to show up as a really beneficial uh, way of looking after your body in terms of longevity, but then also in terms of what you can then, if you all of a sudden decide, right, I want to go and start running, your body is in a really, really good position to go and run and, do that more repetitively and do that more seriously. So that's quite an interesting one, that if people are, if we have a specific sport and that's your goal and that's you're going to focus on that, that's fine. It's not saying change that, but it's like you said, if we go and train in the gym for an hour, 2 hours a day, or go for a run, and then that's it. Try and build into your workout. It's like, right, I've done my run, I've done my weight session, whatever it is, my sport specific session, I've done that. Now I've got the rest of the day. What am I going to do with it? How else am I going to move? Am I going to do some stuff that puts some slightly different loads on, slightly different forces going through the body, different mindset as well? It doesn't always have to be kind of going as hard as you can. There's all sorts of different ways that we want to try and nourish the movement in the body. And I think if people could see it a little bit more like that, even if you've got your really specific training goal, it will, and almost more importantly, if you've got a really specific training goal, it will only help you. Um, Rather than it being kind of like, oh, I'm splitting my time, I need to save my energy for that. It's like, look at it from cover all bases, and that's generally going to be really, really helpful for you.
Yeah, so true. I think a big thing I've seen with the fitness industry and being part of the fitness industry and the way that social media is set up and the way that we get our fitness content and all of our ideas, and how that formulates actually what we do in our training. Often the stuff that we're talking about here, in terms of the biomechanics, it doesn't look the most sexy or appealing thing. And on top of that, people think they always need to be pushing really hard and it needs to be this really intense thing to create change. So that doesn't look appealing. So we look for the things online
Mm.
that look really fancy and fashionable and we can try out in the gym, but
Yeah,
actually that's not the thing that's going to be beneficial.
that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah, that's it. Rachel Francis Thompson, who um, ran the biomechanics course that I did, she's also ace if anyone wants to look her up and see what kind of stuff she's doing. She's awesome, and was really involved with the intrinsic biomechanics kind of starting up. Um, she one of the things me and her were chatting about after one of the course weekends was one of her favorite hobbies. She said is trying to make other people really uncomfortable in the gym with some of the exercises that she's doing. So it'll be working with weights that are really uneven one side to the other, and she might be doing a symmetrical exercise, but she'll have 10 kilos more on one side than she does on the other, and someone will come up to her and be like, what are you doing? And she'll
Yeah.
just try and get into these conversations about it. And it's I know that's not advocating that everybody does that. That might not suit people at particular times, but if you're if you're sort of aware of your body and you know what you're working with, doing some weird stuff in terms of weights or in terms of the load that we put on the body can be really, really helpful. Not necessarily for everybody, not all the time, but our, like you said, our resistance of doing stuff that's a bit weird or doing stuff that's pretty boring is really strong. Like we can't be asked to do that. Like you say, you just want the kind of quick fix. But the interesting thing with the biomechanics stuff is that it is the results that you can get from people are really quick. If it's what people need. There's his story was really well publicized at the time, so it's another one that you can go and look into. But Derek Redmond, who's an Olympian, I can't remember what year or what his distance was, but it was a runner, and it's on YouTube. His race, he was quite emotional footage, um, but he was running and blew his hamstring, or so everyone thought, and he's kind of grabbing his leg in agony, all this kind of stuff. And his dad ends up coming onto the track, and he kind of helps him, and he hobbles to the end, and he does finish it. But that was assumed that it was a hamstring injury. But then 3 weeks later, he was sprinting again, and not just training; he was like full on sprinting again. So that was linked to, I think they figured out that that was a nerve. Basically it just gripped, and that's a protective mechanism that the body will use to stop your hamstring tearing or to stop you doing something more severe. And they linked it. He worked with a biomechanics coach to after that point to get back training, and they figured that it was the beds that were in the Olympic Village at that time, that it was so it was they were very hard beds and quite poor quality and all this kind of stuff. So, and in the kind of headspace leading up to the race, he hadn't been doing his METs, he hadn't been doing the kind of nerve releases that his biomechanics coach had been working with him for up until then. So with the intrinsic biomechanics side of stuff, you can see really extreme results in a really short space of time, um, by doing things that are really small, and you do to yourself most of the time as well. They're kind of not necessarily stretches. It can be more like a release or an exercise, a MET, muscle energy technique, but most of them you're going to do on yourself. So that's the really interesting one, that we have again this real resistance to do stuff that we're perfectly capable of doing unless we see an instant result. And if we don't see an instant result, it's like, well, it didn't feel painful and it didn't look great. and I don't feel any different straight afterwards. So why would I do it? And it's a bit of a mental barrier, I think, that we humans tend to have.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And yeah, I think from my experience, like focusing on like performance and also like coaching other people, we're always looking for like that big needle mover, like what's gonna accelerate us to the success that we want, and obviously fundamentally like doing the work. But actually, like what we're talking about here with like the METs is actually part of that. Like, although it's like foundational work, it's not just like a marginal gain
Mm,
that can be incorporated in. Actually, it is a significant part of the work as much as like anything else. The challenge, like it is with anything, like well, many people I see and some of the guys are speaking about it, is like, how do you live this primal lifestyle whilst being like a corporate worker, and then on top of that I have to commute, and then on top of that I have to be like a man of the house, I have to be a husband, a father, like all these different commitments, and then
mm,
it's on top of this, oh, we're gonna add this movement in that looks quite strange, and I'm not actually seeing or feeling the benefits, and it's like, well, yeah, are you
yeah,
prioritizing correctly on all of this? Is that actually something you should be
yeah,
putting your time and energy into versus focusing on this? And it's kind of hard to balance, but then it goes back into like that trust in the process at the same time. So
yeah,
it can be all
yeah,
quite like complicated, but I think if you want to perform, it's like, well, you got to balance everything out in the correct way, and
yeah.
that's very specific to the individual.
Definitely. And I think we all, again, going back to the thing you said about very often people don't change until they're in pain or until they've injured themselves. And I think that's part of the reason, because it's really hard to put the new habits into place to make change in the first place, even if even if it takes a couple of minutes a day. Um, that is something I'm certainly find myself guilty of, that we we have to be really determined to make a change. So usually we need to have a pretty good reason to. And very often that is because there's something that's making our life worse, whether that's pain or lack of ability to do what we want to do. But that has to happen first before we then go like, "Ah, okay, so how do I get this back? How do I work with that?" Um, and so yeah, I think it's having bearing that bearing that in mind, and then also just being able to look at what's what's valuable to you in your life at the moment, because it's always really difficult. And I as a principle, I won't work with people unless unless I can talk to them and I know that they're going to be committed. Because if they're not willing to do what I ask them to do for at least a week or two, even if it's boring, even if they're struggling with time, everybody can find 2 or 3 minutes in a day. It might be difficult, but everybody can do it. If people aren't willing to commit to that, and if I don't believe it, then there's really no point in going through the process to start off with, because people have got to be in a place where they go, I'm willing to do this, I'm willing to commit to it, and I will do it. And it's a real, it can be I've a real psychological discussion with people, because it's kind of like, you're not convincing me that you're in a place where you believe you actually need this at the moment. I think you want a bit of a quick fix, all of this kind of stuff. And you get some really fascinating answers from people. So it's really hard. It's really difficult to put yourself in a position where you're like, okay, I'm just going to commit to this. I'm going to make it work. I'm going to see if there are results. And after X amount of time, if there's not, then I'm out, kind of thing. Um, but but actually doing that in the first place is really difficult to do, and I find it difficult to do. So it's what we come up against a lot of the time, which is again why when you get a client that is just there and they're they're going to commit, and they're happy to, and they genuinely do, and you can see all the results because they are doing the work in between the sessions. It's like, oh, this is amazing, and then it's super exciting. But yeah, it's a really hard one. It's a really, really difficult one. You've got to be in the right place financially. You've got to be in the right, and whatever that means for you, whether that means you're willing to sacrifice other things so that you can, put yourself through sessions like this, whether it's putting yourself in the right mindset, whether it's putting yourself in the right place, just time wise, whether you're happy to build that time into your day. There's all sorts of things that kind of preempt that come before committing to this kind of process, and that's all totally individual, and it's really hard to influence it if someone's not quite convinced. Really, really hard to influence it. So it is very much a personal decision in your head of like, right, no, this is happening now, and I'm going to do what I need to do to make it happen.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. I think pain can be like a powerful driving force, but I think a lot of people, not everyone, like can have a mentality of like if it's not broke, then don't fix it, and they'll wait till the pain comes into play,
Mm.
and then use that as a driving force to move away from pain. But here's the thing, like there's pain either way, like you were saying. So it's like a case of choosing your pain. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
do I know that somewhere within me there's some change that needs to happen, but I'm ignoring those signs? And yeah,
yeah,
it's not broke right now, so I don't need to fix it, even though the warning signs are there. Or is it
yeah.
actually choosing the pain of leaning into discomfort and
Mhm.
probably spending a bit of time on something else that you don't necessarily want to? You're pushing
Yeah,
off into the future, and also it could be like painful, investing in coaching, investing in the process, and whatever else. Like there's
mm.
all of these like roadblocks. Um, yeah, but prevention's better than cure. But
Yeah,
sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and sometimes
yeah,
like something will crop up, or we feel like just crops up out of the blue, but actually it's been looming in the background for ages. But I think either way, like, and from my experience with like setbacks, injuries, whatever it may be, at the time when that happens, it can often be like the best thing that's ever happened to you. So, like, talk
mm.
about your experience. It's like with your dance and the back pain, it's like, well, had none of that happened, that wouldn't have led you on to find Pilates, which then led you on to find biomechanics and led you to where you are now. So,
Yeah,
it
that's it.
can sometimes be a blessing in disguise. But I
Yeah,
think what we're saying is it doesn't have to be that way. Like, if you're
no,
open and receptive to, well, just being more like dynamic and holistic with your approach to movement and lifestyle.
yeah,
And although you don't need to think about like later life when you're younger, it's like, well,
mm.
start moving your body in a multitude of ways and actually open your eyes up to there being so much more,
Yeah,
and knowing that there is like support out there, to help
yeah,
guide you. But the other part of that is being open, receptive to what's being said, and then also integrating that in. And it doesn't need
yeah.
to be a perfect plan with
No,
the all of the things being like integrated in the best possible way. It's just taking those shots
yeah,
and working on it to the best of our ability for as long as
yeah.
possible.
That's it. And it's just I think having the awareness of what's relevant to me at this stage in my life or at this stage in my training. You know, if you're chatting to somebody, whether it be a coach or someone like myself, um, it's kind of having your own awareness of being like, I don't think this is for me at the moment. And that's fine. That's a really important thing to be aware of. Because then that also gives you a bit the ability to be like, actually, yeah, I think this might be really useful for me currently. Because we all need slightly different things at different times, and whether that's motivation or whether that is kind of ironing out creases in the body, or whether it's kind of more detailed knowledge about the type of training that you're doing. So if you kind of think of yourself as a sponge, and you're just trying to absorb as much information as you can so that you can look after yourself um, as best as possible. For me, that's the way that I try and look at it, because there's constantly, especially with social media now, there's just constant information, and some of it's great, some of it's not so great, but it's all relevant to people at different times, even if it's kind of quite obscure advice, or whatever it is, you've got to having that ability to be able to read into it a little bit and maybe do your own research or just kind of apply it to your lifestyle, your training. That's probably the most valuable thing of that you can try and integrate into your thought process and into your research process, I suppose, when it comes to training and trying to figuring out what you actually want to be doing next. Figure out what's relevant to you at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. And talking about like that integration, and I would want to speak about like the training process and this particular work that we're talking about, like versus like well top end performance, whether it's like running or lifting or a sport specifically. But the work that I done prior to working with you was very much using like the Swiss ball and
Mm.
a variety of different like methods. And the thing that I found and we found was the body's ability to hold that sort of stability work. And I don't know whether this is the same for like Pilates, but I'm pretty sure, like from what you were saying with like the biomechanics and the work that we done, it's not only like training the body to like change and balance itself, but also the body learns and then and holds that for a longer period of time. Versus like if I go in the gym and strength train, if I then don't strength train for 2 weeks,
Mm.
inevitably there's going to be like a regression in terms of strength. But
Yeah,
then like what we were finding from like session to session, depending on how long apart they were, like you'd be
yeah,
like, okay, that's been sustained, that's kind of locked into the body and held. We
yeah,
can now focus on this.
yeah,
And clearly there'll be swaps and changes and regressions in numerous parts. But I think
yeah.
the good thing about this particular type of work that we're talking about is like the body's ability to like learn, embody it,
Mm.
and then hold that for longer periods of times.
Yeah, because again, we want to be efficient, that your body really craves that. So if you it just sometimes doesn't figure out the best way of being efficient itself. So if you can picture it as, if you take the pelvis, the structure of the pelvis, and all the ligaments, tendons, muscles, and how all of that works, all the different directions that it can move in, it serves no purpose for anything within that structure and anything within the body to be inefficient. So we will always try and find the most efficient way of moving. Now, if you imagine yourself walking, um, however many steps you get in a day, on average, it should be about 10,000, ideally. Um, Whether it is or not doesn't matter at all. Just for this example, imagine you're taking 10,000 steps every day. That's a lot of repetitions. So your body has this huge opportunity to learn subconsciously how to walk, and it will repeat that pattern. And we don't, if you're walking, you're not thinking about the gait analysis. You're not thinking about, right, flexion in this ankle and then lift and then forward flexion in the hip and all that. That just totally goes over you, which is great because it means we've got all of this headspace to think about other stuff. But what that means is that if you do pick up a little bit of a protective movement, if you've got a little bit of a stiff shoulder, for example, and to make that stiff shoulder feel better, it actually helps if you lift your left hip slightly higher or you shuffle that left foot a little bit. um, then your body will just pick that up and it'll be like, great, doesn't hurt as much, and I can still do this really efficiently. But what you'll start to find then is that just becomes your subconscious pattern and it becomes efficient. Your body will, because you're doing that so often, your body will make it easier for it to do. Now, whether that means slightly shortening in the tendons or just not being as hydrated, whether it's the connective tissue, the fascia that gets a little bit drier in that area because it just doesn't need to move as much or it doesn't have the same stimulation, whatever it is, again, going back to Katie Bowman stuff, on a cellular level, probably your body will start to adapt to make that the easiest way for you to move. So with the biomechanics stuff, and this is why it can often feel a little bit like, I don't really think this is doing much, because that's the level that you're working on. We're working on, think about how many repetitions your body does in a day. Think about how many times you blink in a day, how many breaths in and out you take in a day. Your body can do vast repetitions of the same thing. So what we want to start to do is, if we take that screening of the body and we see where there's a little bit of dysfunction, we then want to input a little bit of drip fed information to the body. It's like, you're fine. You can release this hip a little bit. You can lengthen this hip a little bit. You don't need to hold on to it so tightly. But we then need to back that up by continuing to move it that way. So that's where the METs start to come in. This is why I personally really love the Pilates combination with intrinsic biomechanics, because that's another really mindful way of training, of moving your body. So you, and it feels like a real effort initially, because you're like, nothing feels different. I don't feel like anything's changed here. But actually, you just keep doing the reps, and possibly within the 24 hours, possibly within a week, 2 weeks, or something like that, if you can start to drip feed that information into your body, that it's like, this is actually more efficient for you now, for whatever reason. You don't have that injury, you don't have that pain anymore. This is more efficient for you. So keep doing this. Your body will really quickly latch onto it, to being like, oh yeah, it is great, brilliant. And it will start to adopt it. So sometimes without you even realizing, your body will have made itself or allowed itself to stay in that more efficient place. So you then don't have to think about it consciously anymore, which is the boring bit. And this is the bit that people often don't stick to. When we're having to think about how we walk and how we breathe, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, that's really boring, and you don't really notice anything. It doesn't feel like it's hard work. It doesn't feel like you're stretching anything. But if we can then start to get that in that subconscious cycle, that's kind of when the magic happens. Then if you can then start to look at all the other parts of the body and start to help that to be more efficient. And then once you've done that, you can then move into that second level of that training triangle, training pyramid. And that's when you can really start to enjoy it, because you then start to notice all of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, I've got so much more range of motion than I used to, or my muscles are able to be so much stronger than they were, because they're not having to, hold on to stop injuring itself, to stop myself injuring myself. So that's it's that kind of snowball effect, but it's just having the willingness to put the bit of really boring work in initially. And it is boring, but it doesn't take very long. And if you stick to it and you're committed with it, it will start to snowball, and it's on a real upward trajectory then. Which again, that's the bit that's exciting for me to see, and to have experienced it as well. But yeah, certainly in terms of that kind of, you can think of it as muscle memory, or that switch from conscious to unconscious. I'm going to confuse myself saying it, but I really love it. And in all aspects of life, you've got your this kind of different stages. You've got your unconsciously incompetent, and then you've got your consciously incompetent. It's when you know you're bad at something, and then you put the work into that. Then you've got your consciously competent, so you know you're good at it, but you're still having to think about it. And then you've got your unconsciously competent, which is like heaven level, where you don't even have to think about it, but you're really good. And it's you can apply it to all sorts of different things, but for the body as well. We are, most of us, in a state of being unconsciously incompetent with lots of really, really small little details that don't affect us for most days of the year. But we want to just start to get it to the level where we can still be unconsciously but competent rather than incompetent, ideally.
Yeah, and I think the challenging thing is like being able to spot this within ourselves. Yeah, we can't really identify it, because talking about that like level of consciousness, like what is like normal for us is how we are each and every day, the way that our anatomy is like positioned, like that is the norm based on the environment. And it's quite hard to see that, and especially with all like the stuff in the fitness industry, and then also not having the knowledge of like the biomechanics that we're talking about. And that's kind of where someone like yourself comes in to go, hey, actually I can see this and I can see that. Often we can see that our posture is not in the best possible way, but like having your particular skill set where you can look at like the body and go, oh, actually that doesn't look right. Let's confirm this through this assessment, and then tying all those things together. And I think that's pretty much what you did. I mean, you'd send me like an evaluation after each session we had of like the chart and the changes that you'd seen.
Yeah.
Uh, I certainly couldn't see that in myself because I don't have like the depth of knowledge in this particular area that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. It's the screening process is really interesting, because the first one is a benchmark, and then beyond that, you're kind of just reevaluating. And it's really interesting to see the changes, and almost always after after someone, if you've been working with someone for a while and you kind of get to know what their norms are, because sometimes we aren't quite symmetrical. Sometimes the structure of the bone isn't quite symmetrical. It's not really anything we can do about that. It's probably not going to cause as much of an issue, but it may just be that we're slightly lopsided. It's fine. But you kind of get to see these little discrepancies and these little imbalances, which in itself is really fascinating. And but what's really interesting then is if you rescreen somebody, things will sometimes just be all over the place, and you're like, what the hell has happened? Like, what have you done? And it's like, what's your week look like this week? And it's like, yeah, so I did the 3 peaks challenge, and then I decided to do X, Y, and Z, and blah blah blah. And my sleep's been all over the place. And it's like, right, okay, so. And
Mm.
obviously, this is what people enjoy doing. This is what they're going to do. But it's the effect it has is so clear, and that's really interesting. Then after a session like that, to be able to turn that piece of paper around and show them, it's like, right, this now that's fine. Well done, that's brilliant. Glad you enjoyed yourself. Now like let's just rebalance all of this a little bit, because it's you've given your body a lot to think about in this high peak level of your training. So let's just rebalance everything, and then in a couple of days you'll be feeling like you can push on again a little bit. So that's always really interesting to see, and it's nice when you have something written down or kind of colored in, that you can actually show people. And that's much easier for us to understand if we've got a visual representation of our own body on a sheet of paper in front of us. It's like, oh right, okay, that tends to have much more of an effect than me telling people. It's like, oh, you've got a bit of a leg length discrepancy. Like, oh, what's that? Like, well, on the sheet of paper, your left leg is an inch and a half shorter than your right leg at the moment. So like, oh, really? Just kind of all of this sort of stuff. So it's an interesting representation to be able to give people, and see how people react in terms of their awareness of it, and then also what they go off and do about it. Ultimately, it's the homework is where all the magic happens. I just measure it. I just kind of keep the readings of it, if you like, and then advise you as to what to do in the meantime. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating to know that like every action and every, well, inaction like causes some sort of change like in the body. And
Mm.
it's a big thing for a lot of the guys in our sport. They often do too much, like too many races in a weekend and then not adequate amount of recovery. And it's like it will be having some sort of an effect on your body.
Mm.
Like you was even mentioning like sleep and like nutrition will come into play. There's just so many like things that affect it, um, but we don't think that they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it can be so far out of balance.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, putting
Yeah.
some more energy into this is actually very, very beneficial, like fundamental.
Yeah. That's it. Because I think if you can have whatever it takes for you to have more of a, it's not even an understanding actually, because I think it varies. For some people, having an understanding is really important, but for some people, it's just experiencing it is the most important thing. But having the awareness, I suppose, is a better word, of how holistic everything is. So, like, sleep is a massive one. Sleep is a really, really crucial one. Obviously, nutrition is a horrendously complex area. But all of these things really tie in. Emotion, that emotional stress. We hold so much emotion in our tissues, I and so if you've got an awareness of that, not even to understand it, or I don't understand it, or not even close, but if you can have an understanding that, if you do one thing that is seemingly totally unrelated to your fitness goal, to, running the marathon next month, it can have a real effect on it. So it's just having that understanding a little bit, having some awareness, so that you can keep progressing, you can keep moving in the direction that you want to, instead of just getting super frustrated with stuff that you're not moving forwards in your goal, that you're not able to shake off that old injury, that you've plateaued a little bit. Just being aware that there are so many influences. Some of them we have control over, some of them we don't. That's a really important one, and can be super super helpful. And again, if it's things that you don't feel like you understand, or you don't feel like you want to dive into your own research, that's then the time when it's really valuable to go and look for a coach, and go and look for somebody that's done all of that research, they've done all that training themselves, and they can just try and help you, guide you through it, for whatever time you need them to. And that's one of the things that I really like about the biomechanics work, and the Pilates stuff to a certain extent, although I feel like with the Pilates you can work with people sort of longer term, but with the biomechanics side of stuff, it does tend to be you work with people for shorter periods of time, and then after that it kind of just becomes check-ins, because you've got you can rescreen them, and if they've had something big happen, another injury or anything like that, and they want to start the process again. But a lot of it is just about building the awareness of what you can start to do for your body, and what you can, all of the building blocks that you have for your body and the particular way that they move. And then beyond that, you can kind of drip feed it to yourself a little bit, and just again be a bit more aware of, like, okay, so I've had a really stressful week, my hips feel tight, so I'm going to just start to do some of these releases on my hips, and I'm going to start, if the shoulder starts niggling again a little bit, I remember that was last time, that was a little bit to do with my pelvis. So it's like, okay, you're not even necessarily going to do the same movements every time, but you can start to strip it back a little bit yourself. And very often I think that's the most empowering thing, if we can just start to have that understanding, that awareness, that knowledge of how to look after our own body. And you absolutely use coaches as much as you like, and as much as is helpful. But for me anyway, like I said, it's having that goal in mind of being able to be your own teacher a little bit, and have that awareness for yourself is really really useful, for sure.
Yeah, definitely having that third person point of view
Mm.
to come in and like highlight what's going on, but then also like educate you, give you the work to go away and implement, and then revisit that, but then getting you to a particular point where you are like self-sufficient, you're more like body aware, like hang on a minute, something doesn't feel right here, what could that be? But then also having the knowledge to like remedy that. But if they don't, then they've got like the ability to like check in and catch
Yeah,
up.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah, that's it.
And the fascinating thing, there's always work to be done as well. Like it's like we found like during our sessions, it's like you do one thing, but then that may have a knock on of something else, and there's
Mm.
something to be done, but it's just like constantly refining. So
Yeah,
there's something to be done, which is really fascinating. But I think that speaks wider than just talking about like biomechanics. It's like there's always work to be done in some way, shape, or form. It's a journey, and remembering that as well, rather than striving for perfection.
yeah,
It's being actually like adaptable to the change, and
yeah.
what works now won't necessarily be the thing that works down the line, because you may have made the improvements and actually it takes new work or something else to keep you moving forward. Uh,
That's it. Yeah, that's it. And there's so many elements to all forms of training. But again, if you're starting from that base level, we can look at things like the we always start at the pelvis, so you can look at whether the pelvis is functional, and then you look at whether the spine is functional, and then shoulders, knees, and then the feet. And that's the system that the intrinsic biomechanics follows. Once you've kind of figured all of that out and you've worked with someone for however long it takes to work through all of that sort of stuff and start to see regular results where things maybe aren't changing as much as they were initially, then you start then to move on to it kind of opens up new doors, which is, I think, the thing to remember if you're doing, and whether this is biomechanics stuff or whether it's another area in your training, but if you're doing stuff that feels like it's, all of a sudden it's gone backwards and you're focusing on something really, really small, the whole point of that is for it to then just open more and more doors and to move you forwards. So try and see it through, try and stick with it, because as soon as you've got through that, you're going to realize actually you've got, these other alleyways that you can go down. So like you can do the core strength ratio testing and all of this kind of stuff, and that's another level that's really fascinating, and that's more about the where the muscles are at the moment in terms of what you use more in your core, and that's going to tie into stabilizing the spine and the pelvis and these muscles that you prefer to use. So it's whether the front of the core is stronger than the back of the core, for example. And if so, then what's that going to do to the back line of the body and to the front line of the body? Or if it's the opposite, if your left side of the core is stronger than your right side, and all of this sort of thing. So, and that then starts to, once you can even that kind of stuff out, if there's imbalances there as well, then you can start to then think about, right, what are some more training exercises that I can do that now challenges my body more because it's able to be challenged more. So it is all really exciting to start at that kind of what feels like the bottom, or what feels like this kind of unexciting area to move into, particularly if you're used to doing kind of higher adrenaline or workouts that are really going to beat you up a little bit and really going to make you question life. All of this stuff can feel quite a bit of an anticlimax, but it then allows you to open all of these doors to doing the stuff that we want to be doing. We can just do more of it, and we can do it a bit better, and we can do it for longer. So kind of keeping that side of it in mind as well.
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. I'm curious, like, have you read a book called Body Mind, or are you familiar with any of I think his name's Kent Ditchwold's work?
No, I don't think I am.
It,
No.
if not, it's definitely one worth checking out. It's an old book. I think it's from like the late 70s.
Mm,
But basically he talks about like the body and mind connection, or mind body connection.
okay.
And it's kind of like going a little bit deeper into like the biomechanics and looking at
Mm,
like what's happening within the physical body. But he talks a lot about people's like posture and how they hold themselves, and that's
mm-hmm.
based on like their mental state, their emotional state, their physical state, and
Yeah.
how people hold it in their body. It'd be a really fascinating one for you to read, or anyone else to read. I read it a few
Mm,
years ago, and there's a
okay.
really funny one in there that he highlights. That there's like because it's an old book, there's like a drawing of someone's backside, so they've got their ass on there, but like
Yeah.
this is tucked under, and he goes, "This is known as the tight ass," and we all know the tight ass. Um, and it's really fascinating. He says, "Look, you can tell a tight ass because normally their glutes are get disengaged and they've got the pelvis tucked under, and
Yeah.
sometimes they can have their shoulders rounded." And he like relates the different types of body part and their posture to like having some sort of like mental or emotional or physical block. And then he has like this technique called like rolfing and like somatic therapy
Yeah.
to like remove that from body.
Okay.
It's
That
really,
sounds fascinating. I'll definitely have a look into that. Yeah, that sounds really, really interesting.
yeah,
That
it's really,
whole side of it is so fascinating, because I was talking about this with someone yesterday, weirdly, actually, who psoas muscle has had a horrendously bad rep over the last few years, but it's it stores a lot of emotion. So very often you'll find when people have, and this isn't my own experience, It's another therapist, but um, you'll find that we kind of get the issues that are often linked to issues with the psoas muscle when people have had sort of traumatic emotional experiences fairly recently, or something's come up more recently. So it's fascinating. We there's I feel like there's so much that we don't know, but then also so much that we kind of are willing to ignore when it comes to training and all this sort of stuff. And where we hold tension, it's really, everyone knows that you hold tension when in your shoulders, and you can kind of see that side of it. But then what that does to how that sends signals everywhere else in your body, that your body's kind of needs to be tight for whatever reason, and how that's all linked to financial stress or stress at work, or the mentality side of things, which is, yeah, again, goes back to the holistic thing. But that's fascinating. That's really, really interesting. I'll definitely look into that one.
Yeah, yeah, it goes quite deep. And I had a big realization, well, at the start of the year, and I know you've ever so much been part of that like journey with like Josie and conversations
Mm,
we had. But
yeah,
my realization was like, okay, I'm maxing out to the best of my ability and knowledge with my nutrition, my physical training. Like I do a lot around my mindset, but actually like there's no point in doing all of them if actually I'm like storing like trauma and experiences like emotionally that are inside me that are kind
yeah,
of like, well, captive within inside me that are actually showing up and causing like me damage. And it's like,
yeah,
well, I need to go work on this like energetic and my spiritual and emotional health
mm,
and like release that. And that's why I went to Costa Rica and sat in the ceremonies there. And actually remember having a conversation at yours afterwards. And
mm,
yeah, it was just, I felt like completely different. Like in that experience, like there was a lot of movement.
yeah,
He's well, quite an incredible thing to experience and very
yeah,
hard for people to believe unless you've experienced that. But there's a lot of movement in those ceremonies,
yeah,
and you feel the energy being shifted. And then part of that was to like purge it and release it in numerous ways.
yeah,
Purging could be hysterical laughter, which I had. It could be
yeah,
vomiting. It could be diarrhea. It
yeah,
could be
yeah,
physical movements. But then it was like after those ceremonies, I like was like, wow, like I'm light, I'm free.
yeah,
So it's just
yeah,
like moving the energy and like releasing the energy. And
yeah,
yeah, and the body mind book speaks about that, but
yeah,
yeah, it's all really fascinating, all of
yeah.
this stuff.
I'll definitely look into that. And it ties in, it ties in so much. It's not, I personally find that all really fascinating. It's not my professional area of expertise at all, but you can definitely link it in, because if you look at the fascia, for example, the fact we want the fascia to be hydrated, we want it to be kind of a little bit slick, and we want it to have this movement, this free movement. And the issue starts to come about when it gets a little bit stuck and it gets a bit knotted and it's a little bit dry. Um, and with the yin yoga side of stuff, that's about releasing deeper connective tissues, so fascia, ligaments, tendons, all of that sort of stuff. Um, it's not necessarily about increasing flexibility, but it's about increasing your ability to go to your full range of motion, whatever that is. So that's, you can quite easily make a link with that of with emotions and all of those, anything like that we store in the body, because we know we store it physically. If you're stressed, you'll feel like you feel shaky, or it affects your breathing. So we know there are all of these links. Um, and then if you start to just think about that long term, then that becomes also really fascinating about what does all of this stuff, even down to things like my opinion of myself, or what I think other people's opinion of me is, and all of this kind of stuff. And you get this understandable sort of shutting down, and um like tensing up, I suppose. And we know that that doesn't help physically. With muscles, we know if a muscle is too short, too tight, too restricted, then that's going to restrict your movement. So, and it makes total sense with energy. Everything goes off vibration. So, we know that if that vibration is affected by anything, then that's going to have a similar sort of physical effect as well as mentally and emotionally and all of the other stuff. So again, it just comes back to that holistic mindset. It's not this kind of wishy-washy like dancing around the moon kind of stuff. It's like it's really genuinely helpful to have an
Yeah.
awareness of all of this kind of stuff. And whatever your goal is, it's think about it from all sorts of different angles, all sorts of different point of views, because it's probably going to be having an effect on you, even if you don't think about it, even if you're not aware of it at that point. So yeah.
Yeah, it's so fascinating and goes back to what you said from Katie Bowman. It's like that nutritious movement,
Yeah.
and it's beneficial not only for the mind but also the body, like we've elaborated on a lot, but then also like spiritually, like the energy. And I've had like some good experiences like breath work, like shaking, like somatic release. But it's
Yeah.
funny, like speaking about what you opened up with dance, like
Mm.
ecstatic dance. And that's a really, I'm sure it comes natural to you in many ways, but also it's like when you go to like retreats, in particular one I went in the start of the year, we done ecstatic dance, and
Yeah.
there's like 20 guys that don't really know each other, and then they're all dancing, and it's like, well, there's no alcohol involved,
Yeah.
typical music I listen to, and you have to like, yeah, move through a series of different challenges and barriers. But then by the
Mm.
end of that session, everyone's like super energized because
Yeah.
like release that energy, and it's like very unstructured. So I think, yeah, it's really fascinating how dance has led you to all of this, and like the movement, but actually there's what the power of dance is like infinite, and really fundamentally it comes back to moving the body in a multitude of different ways. So
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
get nicely back into it.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's it. It's just the if I could say one thing to anybody, whatever their goal, whatever their background, whatever the you know area that they're in at the moment, whatever level, is just get more variety into how you move. You don't worry about making it harder. Don't worry about adding weight. Don't worry about what length of time you're doing it for. Just vary things up. If you know you sit a lot, then go and stand up, go and walk around, go and sit on the floor, go and lie on your front, lie on your back. Just get variety of movement back into your life, because again, on a cellular level, we know that that makes really powerful changes. And it's you'll feel better for it instantly, and it's simple to do. So just get that variety of nutrition back into your body and movement.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I feel like we could just continue chatting, but I'm aware we've been going
Yeah.
for like an hour and a half now. Yeah, thank you so much for like sharing all of this, and yeah, thanks for the work that we've been doing together. It's been
No,
super useful, and yeah, it's definitely helped broaden my like horizons and viewing things in a different way.
good.
Obviously, there's going to be a ton of people that listen to this and they're going to be intrigued to like find you and see more of what you do on a deeper level, and hopefully some of them will like reach out and yeah experience some of that for themselves. So like
Yeah,
based
for
on
sure.
that, where can people like find you? Where can people open up a conversation with you to help them?
Yeah, no, that's great. So the my website is movement mot or movement.mot.co.uk. Instagram mirren.movementmot on there as well. So those are the easiest ways to have a little bit more of a look at what I do, and that's got my kind of email address and stuff like that. Email address, if you want it, is mirren.movement.mot@gmail.com. And yeah, if you've kind of got any questions, anything like that, that you stuff that you just want to find out about, then I'm always really, really happy to have chats with people, because I learn a lot from that as well, of people's experiences. And again, if you decide that it's not what you need at the moment, it's I still learn a lot from just chatting away to people. So yeah, do feel free to reach out if you've got any questions or any queries. I'd love to hear from you. Yeah.
Great, great. And obviously, I highly recommend you like the work that we've done together. And then also, I know some of the team you've chatted to previously, and I know like when the time is right, they'll do some work with you as well. So yeah,
Yeah, no, for sure. No, it's been it's always, as I say, always a pleasure working with people that are open-minded, I suppose, but more than anything are just happy to put that a little bit of effort in, a little bit of background work in. So it's it's always a pleasure working with yourself, and it's it's good to see good results. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for your time. And I'll get this out as soon as possible. Got some time now. So
That's
yeah.
great. No, likewise, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Great. Before we hop off, is there anything else like you wanted to mention? Like, is there any final things that we haven't like necessarily covered that you feel like would be beneficial?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think I think we have pretty much covered everything. Again, I think everything is so personal. I same. I feel like we could keep chatting for a long time, and cover off all sorts of different things. That I'm sure there are things that I'm terrible for this. I'll think of it in a couple of hours time. Oh no, I didn't say that. But again, it's why I just really try and encourage people to just spark up a conversation, or drop me a message or anything like that, because there's always stuff that comes up, and it's you can, the more you can discuss with people from different backgrounds and different interests, and you just learn more. Again, I'm trying to be more of a sponge. But no, I don't think so. I think there's all sorts that we could continue chatting on about quite happily. But yeah, I think for now we've covered some good points for now, for sure.
Yeah, great. And it's good to have, well, as much as possible we can like share this message, because like we said with fitness, there's so much more to it than what meets the eye. So yeah,
for sure.
Great. Well, absolute pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much, Matt. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks for listening. If you found value in today's podcast, then we'll greatly appreciate a rating and a review so we can help find more people like you. Also, sharing this episode on your social media channels will help us reach more people, so that we can provide them with the same knowledge, race strategies, the tactics to allow us all to succeed in both life as well as competition. Also, if you'd like to dive deeper and learn more about how we can support you on your journey, then head over to Instagram or Facebook and send me a direct message. Alternatively, you can visit livingprimal.co.uk for more information about our services. Catch you next time.